Crushing the cultural Marxists. Breaking the grip of corrupt oligarchs. And taking back our country through America first. Here's your host of Liberty and Reality, John Henson.
Welcome back to Liberty and Reality. This last week I saw a couple good, couple okay movies. I can't really say they're great movies, but they were streaming. I watched the new Masters of the Universe movie. It is pretty much what you would think it was. It was a movie version of the cartoon Masters of the Universe. Pretty much kept with the same theme and the same general layout of the original show, except it was live action, obviously. And it was a bit more violent. I don't remember people dying in the original. Maybe I'm wrong, but there was some a little bit of violence, but it wasn't bad. I wouldn't say it was a terrible movie. It was fun, and I wouldn't recommend against you watching it. If you like the old He-Man Masters of the Universe cartoon, then you would probably enjoy this one. So that's about all I can say about that. It's all right. It was fun. And I finally watched the Mandalorian and Grogu. I am a Star Wars fan, committed Star Wars fan. And it was kind of the same thing. It wasn't bad. It was just pretty much the show. And I think they probably could have just done it in another season of Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't think they needed to necessarily make it into a movie, but it is just introduced a couple new characters based on the original Star Wars series. So that was kind of cool. No spoilers, but go on and watch it. It was worth it. And neither of those movies had any crazy cultural Marxist woke nonsense, other than the only thing I didn't like about Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't want to call this woke nonsense. I thought Sigourney Weaver was not casted well. I loved her as Ripley in Alien, so I know she has that kind of ability in her, but she was, I don't know, maybe it was the directing, or maybe she just gotten older, but I didn't think she was cast very well. She was the leader of a X-Wing squadron in the movie, and I wasn't convinced, but whatever. Still a fun movie. I recommend you watch it. But today we're going to talk about something that's a bit far-fetched, possibly, but something that's definitely plausible, and really it's going to be a warning of where we could go with all of this extremist craziness we're seeing in politics right now. Because I see it as something that could happen in the U.S. if things get desperate and things keep moving with our politicians not being more responsible with our budget, with our economy, and using it as a piggy bank. The credit card can't go on forever, and it can get really bad. And if they don't stop, it's going to get really bad. And that's where these current extremist movements, and as I explained, in past episodes, how we've gotten here, is really a lot of it is through greed and just through politicians not being responsible. So I don't know, if we keep going this route, things are going to get worse. And really look at where we've been politically. We're witnessing a political decoupling. Both major political parties are just getting farther and farther away from each other. The ability to cooperate is just decreasing more and more. And I know there have been other cycles in U.S. history where similar things have happened, but not with the radical ideologies, unless you want to talk about the Civil War, which I guess is where we don't want to go, right? It's one of those things. So, once again, if our political class doesn't get more responsible, it's going to be bad. So, we're going to follow up from the end of last episode where we trace the evolution of Marxism from the Frankfurt School to the rise of the Democratic Socialists of America today. That same ideology has a long history at this point. And as I watch this continued ascendancy and popularity of Marxism among the young people, I'm getting more concerned about the rise of extremism in America. Real extremism, not the fake extremism that our political parties have used as propaganda. I'm talking about real extremism. Because the DSA's cultural Marxism is fundamentally anti-Western, as I've explained before. That's its whole thing. It's not about class struggle. It's about cultural struggle. And of course, it faces natural resistance as we stand from patriotic working class Americans. They reject its core premises because it's anti-American. But what happens when those patriotic Americans are crushed by this debt-driven inflation? When they're convinced that socialism can be combined with their native love of country and their native culture. And that's what played out in Germany and in Italy prior to World War II. That's what led to the rise of extremism in Europe. And it was working class citizens who had rejected the traditional communism and Marxism, but they were tricked because of their desperation. And they were tricked by a repackaged socialism that became a patriotic struggle, and a struggle for national survival. So this is my warning to the U.S. today. As rising debt and economic chaos make people desperate, America will become vulnerable to radical ideologies, including possibly a national socialist movement. And if socialist institutions take root, like they did in pre-war Germany and Italy, then you've got the seeds right there to grow. We explained last episode how Mussolini transitioned from radical Marxist to the founder of fascism. He was rejected by traditional socialists because of this move, but it doesn't change the core case. His fascist ideology was still Marxism in its structure. And there's a lot of forms of Marxism out there. There's not just one form. Of course, the DSA is one. The Russia was one. The CCP is completely different from Russia. It's another one. There's a bunch of different cases, and of course, National Socialism, which talk to a socialist, they will tell you that isn't real socialism, but unfortunately, it is real socialism. It's just in a different guise and with a different bogeyman. Before World War I, Mussolini was editor-in-chief of the Italian socialist newspaper, and he led its militant socialist faction. So when World War I broke out, Mussolini was a bit disenchanted with socialism because he realized that the factory workers did not unite against the government, against the upper classes. So what Marx predicted they would do, and it didn't happen. So when he saw them march off to fight for their nations, he decided that what socialism had taught up to that point was wrong. Mussolini's conclusion was that international class war was just academic. It was just a fantasy. The real war was national identity and the national fight for survival. And so he rallied that. He rallied that fear on a national level. Mussolini took the core socialist ideas, the central state authority, the government direction of the economy, and he formed a mass identity around Italy as a nation, combined them with nationalist ideas to form fascism. And he really went back to history and looked at Rome, ancient Rome, and really leveraged those ideas of a great Roman nation as nationalist principles. Now, Mussolini's ideas, of course, were later adopted by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. It's the same thing, the same socialist ideas, and the same nationalist ideology, the nationalist fight. That's how he got people on his side. That's how he changed the the narrative of the nation. Um, Fascism still destroyed free enterprise, placed the state in charge of the economy, controlled wages, and set prices. So it's just socialism in another form. Um, so to understand why the ordinary citizens followed the fascists in Italy and the Nazis, you just have to look at the total breakdown of society that happened before that. Post World War in Italy um, led to a lot of public suffering from the war. It was called a mutilated victory. The nation felt betrayed because they lost 600,000 soldiers and they were denied concessions that they were promised at the Paris Peace Conference, mostly territorial concessions. So a lot of the Italians felt they fought for nothing. They were very upset and very disenchanted. And that humiliation was just compounded with economic failure, militant socialists that were trying to launch a communist revolution similar to what had happened with the Bolsheviks. They paralyzed the country. They seized over 600 factories, and they brought the, the country to the brink of, just this civil war. And it was because of the weak liberal government in Rome that failed to protect them, failed to provide basic public safety, protection of private property, that the citizens turned to Mussolini's paramilitary black shirts. So during this chaos, when militant Marxists paralyzed the country with violent strikes and seizing factories, seizing private property, um, the veterans that had fought in the war that had returned, along with small property owners, working class, middle class citizens, they embraced Mussolini's fascism because they saw it as a way to break those strikes and return normalcy back to the country. So the citizens willingly gave their freedom just to get their dignity back. Germany was similar in terms of the chaos that was happening. They were suffering hyperinflation because of the war reparations they had to pay. The French and the British levied very heavy reparation requirements. And this happened as the elites participated in a libertine culture that was antithetical to the traditional culture of the Germans. And it drove the working class to radicalism. Ordinary German working class citizens suffered through that catastrophic hyperinflation in 1923 that wiped out their life savings. And then the Great Depression happened in 1929. This left 6 million people unemployed in Germany. They were starving. And the Weimar Republic government that was in power before the Nazis, it was part of this elite cultural decay. It pushed these same values in Berlin, and it fought. It witnessed, actually, it didn't prevent the violent street protests between the communists and at the time it was the rising National Socialists before they took power. They were really like street gangs fighting in the streets for power, and the Weimar Republic was just powerless to stop them. So the average German family was still grounded in these traditional values. The working class liked their traditions. They weren't part of this crazy elitist culture. And their society was disintegrating. They saw it morally, economically. And then Hitler came along and he promised them national rebirth. He promised them economic stability. He promised to crack down on the cultural degeneracy that went against their values. And they followed him. They saw this as their way out. Once again, it was a way to regain their dignity. Both Mussolini and Hitler capitalized on this exhaustion of their citizens, because their citizens felt paralyzed and they lost faith in their political establishment. So they wanted something new, something radical. They weren't necessarily socialist by nature. A lot of them fought against communism because communism was in Germany, but nobody was helping them. The government was just worthless in their eyes. So they turned to this radical. So by combining the concepts of Marxism with the powerful message of this national pride and this collective unity under one nation, both dictators offered the public a sense of order with all the chaos going on. And of course, if you look at particularly the Nazis, that was limited to a very small group, to a small racial group of the Aryans. So we know what happened there. The Jews were the enemy, and the Aryans were the supreme, or the master race. That's how they ran things. But it was the majority group in the country. Now, of course, the citizens, in looking to get back their dignity, they surrendered their constitutional liberties. The Weimar Republic wasn't perfect, but it was a democracy, and there was a constitution that provided them protections. But they let Hitler come in and become the dictator. They were convinced that a strong ruler was the only thing that could get their country back right. They could save them from economic ruin and save them from this social decay. And most of all, save them from a communist revolution. The oligarchs in Germany at that time, they also hated the Weimar Republic. And they wanted an authoritarian regime that would crush the organized labor, the labor unions that were forming around communism. They wanted to rebuild national power. They knew they could profit from it. They'd experienced it in World War I, so they knew. So they financially supported the Nazis, and because they thought they could control the Nazis, they didn't expect what happened to happen. So they expected the Nazis would promote their interests and crush their political rivals while enriching them. And the chancellor that put Hitler into power, Franz von Papen, he brokered that appointment for Hitler to become chancellor upon the assumption that those political elites, those oligarchs, could control Hitler, that the conservative members, the ones that were anti-communist inside the German government, the Weimar Republic, could control Hitler. But they lost control almost immediately. Hitler was a very strong personality, and the Nazis took over right away. Hitler designated himself or proclaimed himself as the dictator. And he took all the private enterprise of those oligarchs and brought it under state control. He subjected the corporate executives to state planning. He was running all the companies. They could stay free market. They were still the bosses, but they all worked for Hitler at that point. And any oligarchs that opposed that stepped out of line. Hitler seized their assets, just confiscated their companies, made them state companies. So they had a motivation not to go against the government after he took a couple of these companies under state ownership. And at the same time, there were American industrialists, American oligarchs who supported the Nazis. They liked that model. And so they engaged in some schemes in the U.S. to try to bring it to our country. Of course, Henry Ford, he wrote The Anti-Semitic International Jew, a book that directly influenced Hitler and his anti-Semitic Nazi ideology. And in 1933, there were several American oligarchs that tried to convince Smedley Butler. He was a Marine Corps Major General, real legend in the Marine Corps, to launch a fascist coup in America. It's called the Business Plot. And they launched that because they wanted to install a dictator to serve their interests, just like in Germany. Smedley Butler is also notable because he stood up for the bonus army. That was the American soldiers that returned from World War One, and they weren't paid. It's a story that's not as well known, but it's definitely worth a look up because a lot of those generals that were heroes in World War II were sent out as young officers to crush the bonus army protest in D.C. Like I said, these were just soldiers that wanted to get paid, they wanted what was owed to them. The government was not honoring its commitment to them. So that happened. Smedley Butler also wrote a book. It's fairly short, but it's a great book that I definitely recommend reading called War is a Racket. And he basically talked about how his entire career waging wars around the world was spent in service of these oligarchs. Some things never change, I guess. So, just like the elites that funded the rise of the Nazis to protect their own interests, the modern oligarchs are doing the same thing today, bankrolling cultural Marxism and the infrastructure that really supports and has led to the DSA. And as with the Nazis, the oligarchs can lose control of these radical movements. This can lead to horrible consequences for them and for the country, especially for our liberty. Now, another example, and as I said, China is Marxist, but they're different than the Russians. Totally different way they developed and along different lines. They're still communist, they're still Marxist, but as they've evolved, they've been probably the most successful of the communist countries because they've actually adopted free market principles. They did that after a rapprochement. We talked before about Nixon um, approaching the Chinese and meeting with Mao, and that was where things opened. And later, of course, they got MFN status, most favored nation status. They were really let into the community of nations as an equal, and that allowed them to rapidly advance. And they're right now somewhere between us and the United and them, between the United States and China. They're either number one or number two economies, depending on how you look at it. So when you actually break it down, China's model looks a lot more like fascism than communism. And, you know, you start with how the Chinese Communist Party pushes a racial superiority, the Han Chinese. Um, Han Chinese are looked at as the chosen people, I guess, in China. They are the superiors. And for example, the dynasty that was taken advantage of in China's eyes, the last dynasty, the last emperor, they were Manchurian. They were a different racial minority from up north of China. And the Han Chinese blamed them and say it was because the Manchus were in charge that the West was able to take advantage. They use those same racial superiority ideas in a number of ways. And if you dig into Chinese culture, which a lot of people don't understand, they have they're pretty bigoted in a lot of ways in China. I'm not talking about every Chinese person, just the general statement of the Chinese in China. For example, you look at that last Star Wars series. There was a guy named Poe, a black guy. Um, he was a black stormtrooper. He was removed from the movie posters in China because they wouldn't accept the black guy. It was just that was the way they looked at it, and there's several other things, whether it's homosexuality or the role of women. They have their own um, ideas of racial superiority. Let me just leave it at that, and you can look it up yourself. And of course, they also operate a system of state capitalism. So there's private business. There's lots of billionaires in China. And the only caveat is they have to obey the government, anything the government says to them. They have their own private boards, but on their private boards, they have to have a member of the Communist Party there. And he's going to tell them what they need to do. He won't run their companies. He's just going to give them the orders from above. So very similar to what Hitler had set up, Mussolini had set up under their National Socialism and Fascism. Also, Chinese Communist Party, they have religious and ethnic minorities that they have forced into concentration camps. It's a real tragedy over in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs. And there's other groups too, other subgroups out there that they have done similar things to. I think the Uyghurs are the most famous, but they have done the same. They've set up concentration camps based on race and culture and religion. They're also trying to expand. They're not looking for Lebensraum like the Germans were, but they are looking to expand their territory using ancient claims, the 9-dash line, which gives them supposedly, in their eyes, control of the South China Sea based on old maps that were discovered. It's not internationally recognized, but they claim it as the law and put them at odds with many of their neighbors who also claim that territory as theirs. So they really operationalize a modern version of National Socialism, and they do it in several different ways. They're very offensive. They are at war, but not in the sense that we really think about. They have different asymmetric ways of waging war. Things like what they call the three warfares, which are psychological warfare, media warfare, and lawfare. And then they also have this military manifesto they call unrestricted warfare. And none of those things mean you have to shoot anybody or bomb anybody. They're all asymmetric. Um, they all work around the edges, and they attack. For Western society, they attack our system, our civilization, our ethics, our freedoms. So, this lawfare, they look to manipulate international norms, maybe use things like the um, climate change laws, where they will advocate strict climate change laws for everybody but themselves. They'll find ways around it, or various other things that they will push. They've spent a lot of money on their being the United Nations, on influence through the United Nations. They run a lot of that stuff, including the WHO. If you remember back to COVID, the WHO would not acknowledge the existence of a separate Taiwan. So anyway, they consider that as part of China. Obviously, the Taiwans don't agree with that. It's not. It's not part of the United States foreign policy. So, but that's just some of the ways that they manipulate things. They also use media warfare to control narratives in the media, and they do things like interfere with elections through that. They've been caught red-handed interfering in elections in Western countries like Australia through things like that. And then they use psychological warfare to demoralize adversaries. And this is where I get to that same thing Yuri Bezmenov warned us about. Kind of taking Russia's place in the ideological subversion game. And well, obviously, you look at Roy Neville Singham as probably the most famous one today, sending Chinese money to demoralize America and spread these cultural Marxist ideas as a weapon. So there's others out there. We don't know all of them, but they're out there. Singham is the one that's in the news now, under investigation by our government, but he's not the only one. So that's the way they're conducting warfare against us. It's different, and that strategy gets them to the exact same endpoint as a military strategy. They're dominating the region, they're monopolizing resources in the region, and they are bringing these other countries around them. They're subjugating them. They can't fight back. So you look at this historical shift in pre-World War II Germany and Italy, and it looks the same as this evolution of modern China, in terms of the government structure. And it's a direct example of what could happen in the U.S. if people lose faith in their representative government and become desperate for a solution. Now, the American financial system is going to collapse. The debt is unsustainable. It's going to exceed $40 trillion soon, as I've said. The just the interest on the debt is more than our military budget. It's like number 4 in terms of line items. So that's unsustainable. It's just going to get worse. And the politicians aren't doing anything to stop it. They're not being fiscally responsible at all. So public desperation is going to grow. Inflation is going to keep going. It's not going to stop. It's going to get worse. It has to. It's just basic economics. Or if the Democratic Socialists get into office, they're going to continue to spend massive amounts of money, and they're going to soak the rich or tax the rich or whatever you want to call it, and that's just going to lead to recession. It's going to lead to all the productive people. They will get taxed to a certain point, and they'll either leave or there'll be no more money to tax, and then it's going to fall on the working class. Either way, it's going to lead to a desperate situation. The working class is going to get angry. They're going to look for solutions. When the DSA socialism fails to help, and it will, because it always does, in American working class, we are known as a rebellious people, obviously. They're going to look to movements. They're going to look to alternatives. Now, there's another driver here that could lead to radicalism, and that's the military-industrial complex. Military-industrial complex is controlled by oligarchs who exert influence over our foreign policy. They profit from war, so they lobby for war. And we've seen that many times. Of course, I told you about my academic record. I went to the Eisenhower School in D.C. as part of National Defense University. And we talked about all of this stuff. And I learned a lot. I learned basically how to operate within the military-industrial complex as a military officer. That was the goal. I went to school at that school with people from industry, people from other branches of government, from foreign governments. So it's pretty extensive, the tentacles of this thing. Of course, Eisenhower warned us in 1961 of the growing military-industrial, and his original speech was military-industrial congressional complex. But he took congressional out because he thought it would be too controversial for his final speech. But that's what he meant. And that's just the partnership between our government and the oligarchs who run the defense industry. He saw the danger rising. And it looked historically, the United States and other countries, they demobilized their military after major wars. It was just expensive to maintain a full-time military. Didn't make sense. It was just a waste of money. They had other priorities. But that changed after World War II. And during World War II, there was a massive amount of money spent. These companies, these oligarchs, made a lot of money in the defense industry, these industrialists. And so they sustained it through the Cold War. Um, there was another excuse, obviously, to continue this defense complex. Of course, Korea came next. The Korean War was another big war, and just went on and on through Eisenhower. And ultimately, it didn't end. The Cold War didn't end until 1990. And they found other reasons to go to war. So it's just been a continuous series of conflicts, both during and after the Cold War, including right now, we're supporting Ukraine militarily, and we have active military operations in Iran, along with numerous other global interventions. We have thousands of troops forward deployed at all times. Now, if you combine this military ideology with economic cultural pressures facing the country, these oligarchs in the military industrial complex could easily push people to war if people get desperate. They can employ this military under a wave of state-directed nationalism. And this is where it gets really dangerous. You combine that nationalism with that socialism, then you get what happened in World War II in Germany and Italy. Especially if that economic collapse just deepens and deepens. Foreign expansion and military intervention could be something that's repackaged as something to restore national wealth or regain American glory, regain dignity. That's what it'd be all about. And revitalize the working class. And we've been conditioned for decades already to accept these foreign military adventures. Nobody really protests them in any big way anymore. There's people that complain about them, but there's not really any big protest. Just kind of got used to it. It's the way it is. The Congress doesn't stop it. The public doesn't stop it. So we've learned to accept it. And if you contrast that to before World War II, FDR, he wanted to intervene earlier in Europe. Churchill was asking him, and he refused. He wanted to intervene, but Congress refused. He couldn't get the votes. Not until Pearl Harbor happened did he get the votes. So that was traditionally the way we looked at things. And obviously, that was a big change after World War II. Became a lot more willing to go to war. So, the greatest fear in America is that the DSA backers figure out that the working class won't accept their class struggle narrative, and they're going to lose control, and they don't want people coming in and stealing their piggy bank. So they can always fall back on nationalism in the warfare state. And like Nazi Germany, U.S. military power can be used for expansion if it's presented in a way that the American people will digest. Once again, it goes back to that idea of dignity and giving the working class their dignity back. Working class that is crushed under inflation, and working class that can hardly afford food, or maybe they're starving, or whatever it is. That's a way to give them their dignity back that they would follow. And as in Germany and Italy, we saw, and even with the DSA now, people will give up their individual rights in the service of one of these ideologies. They feel it's going to give them control back, dignity over their lives. Very dangerous. Very dangerous to see this rise of socialism and what it could lead to in the United States. So the antidote, of course, is to continue to rally around our core America First values. The ideas that were brought together in 2024. That means fiscal conservatism. That's the first thing We need to elect politicians that will be fiscally conservative. We need somebody who will lead this movement, slash slash this deficit spending. We need Doge back. There's something similar. We need to deregulate our domestic energy infrastructure. Now, the Trump administration has gone to lengths to do that and get us out of these climate change ridiculous policies that are very inefficient. But we need to keep working towards that. We need to drill for more oil, and rely on what we have in the United States. A lot of that may be hydro or whatever, that we can unlock. Pipelines that can come down through Canada, a lot of different things. Refining capacity. Refining capacity would help immensely bring down the price of our energy. But like here in Washington State, our energy is going to go up radically over the next few years. It's already gone up radically, because of climate change bills. And we need to deregulate that stuff because it's just only going to crush the working class. Oligarchs don't give a shit about it. And that's going to make people increasingly disenchanted and radical. Can you see it? They're getting radical already. We need to protect our elections from cheating and foreign influence. This is the thing that's being pushed now with the SAVE Act. Doesn't make sense that it's not being passed, except some people are cheating already. And that needs to stop. That's our rights. That's our elections. The American people. It's not the politicians' elections. It's very simple. You prove your identity when you go vote. I don't know what possible excuse they have, but they're not voting for it. There are a lot of them that will and a lot of them that won't. They can't get the votes through. Somebody needs to come in and push that through. We need strict border patrols, or border controls. We need those walls. And I know that's not foolproof. People can go over and around walls and under walls. I get it, but it is a barrier, and it does stop most of the illegal immigration from coming across. And then enforcement can hinder the other things. We have technology that can hinder that. We have cameras, drones, different things that can stop that. But you have to start with the border wall. It's easy. Everybody sees it. Normal people can't just walk across the border. We need our immigration laws to be enforced strictly. And when somebody violates the law, you deport them right away. We must commit to a pro-peace foreign policy. We need to get rid of the interventionism and stop accepting this warfare state, this endless nation building. We do need to secure peace through strength. Don't get me wrong. We still need to have the strongest military in the world because you never know when we may need to defend ourselves. But we don't need to waste it and destroy it overseas for nothing, just so somebody can put a few extra bucks in their pocket. No, we don't need that. We need to demand complete free speech and prohibit any federal agencies from colluding with the social media companies, any corporate platforms, to censor any speech, political debate, or anything. First Amendment is very simple, and the government has no business interfering in that, particularly colluding with businesses. Now, we need to root out corruption. We need to dismantle unaccountable portions of the administrative state, particularly the intelligence services, because they've been responsible for a lot of bad things around the world, and there seems to be no oversight. And look no further than all these things going on around Epstein and his connections to Mossad and CIA or whoever else. And we can't get any answers. And there's many, many other things, whether it's JFK or 9/11 or on and on, that are hidden from us still. So we need to dismantle that. We need to control it. That's our government. That's our money. And finally, we really need to celebrate our own Western civilization. This this 250th anniversary of the country. I guess it's America 250 or whatever. There's a couple different names out there. Whatever it is, we need to celebrate our accomplishments. We are the society that every other, civilization wants to emulate still, in one way or the other. We are still the leaders, and we are the place that people want to come to. They will die to get here. Um, so we're still the best, particularly the United States. We're the best country on earth. We are still the shining city on a hill, like Ronald Reagan said. So we need to preserve our national heritage, and we need to spread it. We need to, um, we need to talk about it. We just need to be proud, and we need to counter the narratives of the cultural Marxists that hate us. Stop it. Um, we need to ensure that our government puts American citizens first, America first, and that should lean heavily on the working class. They should be number one. Um, we need to defend our constitutional republic by all means. Socialism, in all of its forms, always produces tyranny, and it's taken over our political establishment. We need to push back hard. We need to protect our individual freedom, and that requires an uncompromising adherence to the America First principles that we came up with and um, that brought us together in the 2024 election as a country from all political ideologies. And we need to stop fighting with each other over what Trump's doing and realize that that movement is ours. As I've said many times, that movement is ours. Those principles are ours. It's vital that we take a lesson from history and understand what extremism will do to our country. And right now, our country is going in an extremist direction with Marxism. The oligarch backers, they may not be able to maintain control. They probably can't. When the population gets desperate, there's more of us than there are of them. When our population, our working class, loses faith in their representative government, you don't know what they're going to do. Right now, all the seeds have been planted. Socialism, a military-industrial complex backed by oligarchs, and this nationalism, this love of country we have. We need to make sure that love of country stays the classical liberalism. It doesn't get taken advantage of. I appreciate you for listening to Liberty and Reality. This was a different kind of episode, and it's really a warning. So please share the show with your friends. Let me know what you think, and take care. Thank you very much.